Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us on another edition of Reasonable Doubt, brought to you by the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association. I'm your host, and back beside me, once again, Julio Vela. JV, what's up, man?
Survey says staying dry.
You are?
It's because, you know, Harvey hosts the Family Feud, and y'all see that? See that?
Are you ready for did you get all your water and batteries and everything else?
Oh, no. So my wife called me up, and she said, hey, I just bought a generator. I said, wait, you're going to buy a generator? You just bought a generator. She said, no, I just bought it. It was, you know, like a lot of money.
Right.
I said, oh, you mean we just bought a generator.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but we're ready. We're ready.
We are not.
I saw your stockpile.
It's not good. It is not good.
Are there any sprinkles in that donuts?
Yes, but they have already been eaten.
Oh.
So we are already at least one donut down. So we got donuts, we got Chips Ahoy, we got some bananas, we got one bottle of Gatorade, and a box of Ritz crackers and a bag of goldfish.
Quick oats, oatmeal.
Yeah. So we have. I mean, this is not all we have. We still have some other stuff. But the good news is, I am sufficiently armed with ammo and plenty of firearms to take out the zombies if they come down our street.
I will say though, if I had the head of the top science lab in the country here, I would be perfectly prepared and feel very comfortable about going into this weekend.
Our guest tonight, ladies and gentlemen, the president and CEO of the Houston Forensic Science Center, Peter Stout. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, we're going to be here for the next hour with Peter talking about our new crime lab. We're going to open up the phone lines about 8:30. For those of you who are not out trying to get gasoline or water or other supplies, Chips Ahoy, Gatorade, that sort of thing, call in with your questions. It's going to be an interesting show tonight. We got a lot to talk about. 713-807-1794 is the number. I also have Twitter up here, so you can send me your questions at HCCLA_TV, and we'll read them right here on the air. Peter, it's a natural question at this point because we do have a hurricane bearing down on us. What is your office doing for disaster preparations?
Yeah, we spent a lot of today working on just that. Shifting around, particularly for the crime scene unit, that put them onto 12-hour shifts so that we don't have people, try not to have people either getting stuck getting to their shift or getting stuck getting off their shift. Making sure we had dry ice in place if we lose power and have to put stuff in refrigerators to keep stuff cold. Making sure we got plastic to cover things up. All of those types of things, but you know, we're probably going to lose a couple of production days out of this.
Well, and crime doesn't stop just because we have 25 inches of rain barreling down on us. I guess what does your staff do in terms of you know, getting ready to go out in the field? I mean, are you all in charge of collecting the evidence when you get there? I know there's a new CSI unit. We'll get into all that, but I mean, what kind of steps do they have to go out with a special team if there's high water or anything?
Well, you know, we'll see on that. Really, the capacity we've got with crime scene unit is we make homicides, dead babies, and officer-involved shooting. That's really all we've got the capacity to make. So, you know, we'll see in this if there is a homicide scene that we need to make. We'll work with HPD officers on how we get there. You know, hopefully there's not any of that, but that's how we get to that. It could be a real challenge for us. That's the part that really goes to the scene. Otherwise, in the laboratory side of things, we've got a little bit more latitude in there of being able to tolerate a couple of days that we are out production. And this is happening over a weekend. Typically, the laboratory is not operating over the weekend. But you know, when we have days out, it hurts turnaround times, and it has implications that rattle on for days after that.
What about water intrusion or loss of power? I mean, are those real concerns?
Yeah, it's a real concern for us. So what we'll do probably tomorrow is shut equipment down, cover stuff up with plastic, get evidence away from windows and back in places where it's secured. A lot of facility is a serious issue for us. The laboratory exists across 11 different floors in 4 different buildings. So, you know, some of the buildings we're in are much better situated for it. Some really we don't handle evidence in, so some are less of a worry, but on multiple floors, not all the floors have a roof on them that might leak. There's all of those things we worry about.
Why is it that the lab is located all across so many buildings?
So when the laboratory functions that started with HPD, so what HFSC did was we took over laboratory management in April of 2014. So there was what was the laboratory options came to HFSC. Well, we transitioned some of the people, we transitioned equipment, we transitioned the location. Laboratory space is expensive to build. It's a long process to get that stuff built. I mean, the city spent the county spent 10 years working on getting their new building put in place. So we've had to use facility that is there. We've got some additional space that we moved into a couple of years ago to give a little bit more space for us, be able to start moving some of the functions out of the HPD headquarters building.
Right.
But you know, the city's got financial issues. It's difficult to find the funding to build it. But that's why we kind of found the space that we've been able to find.
You know, a lot of people, especially the defense bar, the defense lawyer bar in the county, has been very vocal that y'all are just the HPD crime lab.
HPD crime lab rebranded.
With a new name and a new sticker.
Yep.
What's your response to that?
I can understand that perception, and as long as we're in that HPD building, it's really difficult for people to see otherwise. I try to help people understand we are effectively a tenant in that building, like the McDonald's is at the base of the building. The security systems that control the access into our space are entirely under our control. It's entirely separate from HPD. We've got separate badges for that. HPD officers have to sign in just like anybody else into our spaces. The employees, we still have some employees that were part of the city, where I think we're down to 18 City of Houston civilian employees that are still within our management, and I think we're now down to about 10 or 12 classified officers that are still part of our management. And you mentioned about the crime scene unit. That's transitioning to become entirely civilian here by the end of this calendar year. There's still, I think, 3 or 4 officers that are working within that group that will transition back to HPD here in about November. So there's a change in personnel, there's a change in the control of the space. I am very different from HPD. I came in from outside.
Do you have any law enforcement background?
No, I don't. I started my career in the Navy. I was a naval officer, and actually I ran one of the Navy's drug screening laboratories, so I joke I was a narc for the Navy. And then after I separated from active duty, I ran a commercial laboratory that did workplace drug testing and controlled substances testing, sports doping control. And then from there, and for the last 10 years before I came here, I was in the not-for-profit research sector. I had a group out of North Carolina that did research in forensic sciences, did some laboratory accreditation programs, proficiency testing, manufacture. And then I've been here at HFSC for just a little bit, not quite 3 years.
Is it important to you to not be identified as another HPD rubber stamp, or is it something that doesn't really concern you much?
No, it is an important aspect to us of we talk a lot about independence, and in the forensic sector, the forensic industry in the whole nation, there's a lot of discussion about independence and what independence means.
Right.
Actually, the one that still resonates with me, I was listening to another fellow lab director, I forget from what state, and he was saying, you know, we've been independent for 30 years. Every time I talk with the police chief, he agrees with me. Not quite sure that's quite what it means. But there is how you construct the circumstance. There's a lot of different flavors of independence around the country. And this is a rather unique one that is closer to a governance structure that moves it somewhat out of government, and there's more insulation from some of the political pressures. But there are examples, Division of Forensic Sciences in Virginia reports directly to the governor. The Washington, D.C. laboratory, in spite of some of their troubles, they report to the mayor. The system in Alabama actually started within the university system, and so is within the university system. So there's a variety of flavors of this, but back in 2009, when the NAS report came out, are you familiar with the report that came from National Academy of Sciences that was quite critical of forensic sciences, and honestly, rightfully so.
Yeah.
And I was part of an organization called the Consortium of Forensic Science Organizations, which is the American Academy of Forensic Sciences involved in that, National Association of Medical Examiners. I was representing the Society of Forensic Toxicologists and the American Board of Forensic Toxicology in that. And there was a lot of discussion about, it's not so much what the management structure of the laboratory is, it's about the resourcing of the laboratory, it's about that the laboratory is sustainable and those types of things. And yeah, that's part of it. But the longer I've been in this, it's important for the laboratory to be separate from law enforcement and prosecution.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about independence and everything. To me, the larger issue is having a cohesive unit almost, to me, because when you have, you have the DPS lab, you have your office, you have the county's office, and it's that way in almost every major city in Texas, and
it's like that in a lot of major cities
across the nation. Yeah, and I just feel like there needs to be, if you're going to achieve true independence, there almost needs to be this, we report to the governor, and it's a statewide thing to really take it out of the true, because I feel like when you get on the smaller level, the county and the municipality level, that's where you really run into.
Well, the place I think that there's some of the biggest difficulties is the 2- and 3-man kind of operations that sit within police agencies all over the place.
Right.
And probably some of the most troubling things I've seen around the country are these very small forensic operations that rest entirely within a law enforcement agency, and it's really difficult for them to resist requests and resist the kind of subtle pressure to perform in a particular way.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I kind of feel like, so for instance, when somebody brings your office evidence in a case, okay, the police bring it in, for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, most of our evidence comes from HPD.
I'm assuming, there's not like citizens walking in off the street saying, "Hey, I found this hand."
That's real quick.
But and maybe I'm making too much out of this, but it seems to me that by tagging that evidence, you're putting the suspect's name on it, you're putting their date of birth, that you're almost leading that forensic officer to a conclusion.
There's real concern about that, and there's a lot of discussion right now about what we call cognitive bias. Actually, I've got one of the researchers, ETL Drawer, coming in to do a workshop with the new crime scene group about cognitive bias stuff. What we're trying to do is construct mechanisms to try and give a firewall and a bulwark between the analyst and having some of that information. So what we discuss is a lot of things called either domain relevant or domain irrelevant information. There's information that we have to have in order to process a case effectively, appropriately.
Like what? What's that?
Well, it's understanding that this is to be analyzed for controlled substances and not necessarily DNA. It is, like with DNA, we have a lot of requirements around what is a CODIS eligible profile. So we have to have that information in order to know whether we can actually enter this in CODIS or not. In toxicology, you can't test for everything. We've got a suite of drugs that we test for normally, but we may have to have additional information to know we need to look for something unusual or a very low concentration that we wouldn't normally look for. So there's domain relevant information, but the domain irrelevant information, how do we get that separated from the analyst? Because it could be potentially biasing. It could do, like what you're saying. Across all of forensics in the whole country, this is kind of a new thing, because really the way laboratories have operated for decades in this country haven't really considered that potential. And I think We still have a long way to go. We've still got some systems we got to get into place to see it run as I would like to, but we've got some of the foundations of that. We've created, we call it client services, basically a front door where that kind of information is designed to come into, so we have as a system the information we need, but there's a means of now controlling what information actually passes on to the analyst.
You say client services. Who's your client?
Well, we have, you could call it stakeholder services, you could call it a lot of people. It is investigators, it's DAs, it's defense attorneys, it's people, it's that interaction with those outside justice system stakeholders.
Okay.
And you mentioned, so who do you report to?
I report to a board of directors. It is a 9-member citizen board. They're appointed by the mayor and then they're approved by city council. Once they're on the board, the bar to remove them from the board is pretty high. It's basically a malfeasance cause kind of designation to remove them from the board. So the design of the setup was to offer some level of political insulation. But that's, I mean, they have fiduciary responsibility for the company. They have management authority. They can fire my butt if I'm not doing it right. That's who I report to directly.
Is the board.
Is the board.
And we were supposed to have one of the board members on tonight. Anthony Graves was going to join us.
Happy birthday.
Yeah. He's going to try to join us next week. Unfortunately, he got a little under the weather, so couldn't join us this week. But I think Anthony's going to try to join us next Thursday night. Cross your fingers. Hopefully he'll be able to.
How do you feel about there being a civilian board or the structure that you report to? How do you feel about that? And are there other, you said there's other models that are in place, but what's your opinion on that?
I really like my board. I like the structure that this is. So I came out of North Carolina. I sat on the North Carolina Forensic Science Advisory Board that was created after the North Carolina laboratory had some serious problems. But that was a strictly advisory board. Many of these you see, so Washington, D.C. has an advisory board. There's a form of a commission in Virginia. There's the New York Commission, there's Texas Forensic Science Commission. What you kind of need to understand that here in Texas, Texas is really being viewed as a real model of how to reform forensic sciences, how to move forensic sciences forward across the whole country. And it's
really,
I know, Texas of all places, I get it.
It's a bold statement.
Not where you would have expected, but it really has, and it's not just simply what's the model at Houston, it's Texas Forensic Science Commission.
Okay.
It really has been looked at as, I've heard people refer to it as what a commission looks like when it's done right. There used to be a lot of look at New York. It's had its challenges in New York, and the Forensic Science Commission here, I think, they've done a good job of balancing all the tugs and pulls that a commission has to do, working to really try and improve the nature of what's going on in the laboratories. So the combination of all that, the combination of the Michael Morton Act, 3914, all of these things have kind of come together in Texas to really set up the conditions where a laboratory has the opportunity to be far more transparent with the information. I mean, we post all of our quality incidents on the public website, and now DPS is doing the same thing. So you're starting to see these things kind of gain a lot of momentum here in Texas, and I think you're going to start to see that show up elsewhere in the country.
You were recently in the news over a incident like that, where I guess some evidence was found from a 1998 rape kit in one of your officers or investigators' offices.
Yeah, it was a former employee. It was a position that we had eliminated because of trying to optimize our management structure. And as we were going through files from that individual, we found a piece of evidence. Now, looking at the circumstances of it, I'm pretty confident, because it was all in its DHL packaging. The report, so this was a case that was from 1998. There was a Chapter 64 post-conviction testing that had been ordered for it. That's what had it being shipped out in 2005 and coming back. The results from that made it where they were supposed to. So, it looks for all the world like they pulled the report out, got that where it was supposed to, set this down, and it disappeared into a pile and then ended up in a box. And 12 years later, we find it.
I mean, I guess that's kind of the real difficult part of this is you guys really, as a forensic science, when you're using forensics to convict people in crimes, you should be held to a higher standard.
It should be.
Because of just the overall nature of what you're doing. I mean, there is a high standard there, but there's human error involved too. I mean, incidents like that are going to happen. And you know, obviously your goal is to try and minimize those, but you can't eliminate them altogether. So what kind of steps have you put in place to try and mitigate that or lessen those?
Well, so that particular one, you'll have to keep in mind, in 2009, there was not, we call it LIMS, Laboratory Information Management System, the computer information systems that help manage where evidence is, where steps in the process are, keep that all organized. Didn't exist at that point. So LIMS systems that have come in, better information management systems, we're actually in the process of replacing the LIMS system that we inherited from HPD to move to, I think, a far better system. But you know, these are big, complicated, what are called enterprise ERPs, the system that drives the whole thing. What's
the new system?
The new system is one called Justice Tracks, and it actually is what most of the laboratories in Texas are on that product. It's probably the most dominant LIMS product in the country. So we're in the process of getting transitioned to that. Hopeful that we'll get that launched in November. But it is a big, complicated launch. But those types of, we have a bunch of sciencey equipment, lots of lights that flash and squiggly lines on pages, but really what we make is information.
As I would say, doomaflages.
Yes, doomaflages, exactly. But really, we're an information business. So I think a lot of laboratories are starting to come to the understanding that we've got to manage the information better.
Yeah.
So building towards systems of how we manage the information, building towards systems of how we handle all the work systematically, engineering controls around how evidence flows through, how evidence is tracked, barcoding, RFID technologies, all of these tracking technologies that are used in industries all over the place. Getting all of those things in place, but then establishing the fact that, you know, if there's an error, we handle the error in a systematic way as it is. So if it affects the results or it affects the quality of the evidence, the intention is we'll document the corrective action, we'll document as best we can, understand the root cause of it, look towards solutions based on that root cause, but then also do everything we can to ensure that that information is made as available as we can. So we have tried to be very deliberate about ensuring that we post that on the website, that we not only just put it up there as a pile of files on a website, but that we tell people in an understandable fashion where it is. So I end up on the news more often.
Which I'm sure you love.
Well, not too long ago, there was an incident where bullets were being left at a scene, things weren't getting tested, and there was some, we had a show about it, respectfully, a show about where the Houston Forensic Science Center, or the evidence that was being collected wasn't being collected or wasn't being tested in a manner that should have been proper, or wasn't being documented as it should. And without going into that, following up on what Jimmy asked, is, you know, what are you doing, or what is your, you know, mission to make sure that things are being collected, the DAs know about if this particular bullet wasn't collected, and defense attorneys are being made aware of these kind of things. What have you done to prevent something like this from happening again, or what are you looking?
So you're talking probably particularly about the crime scene stuff.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
And crime scene. So the crime scene unit that came across from HPD, this was a known challenge at the outset. What came across were all classified officers. That's what had been doing crime scene investigation at the start. And it was the design of the organizational setup at the start that it would gradually transition to be a civilian unit. It's been a rough road on that. It's not been easy. It's, you know, and I try to get people to understand, it's really easy, and it gets hyped up a lot that it's been HFSC against the officers, that the officers were bad. There's some really good people in there. They're well-intentioned. They wanted to do a good job of it, but some of them, the training that was started with was from a different era. The expectations of what needs to happen at a crime scene have progressed, they've changed, and it's a really difficult thing for those people that are in those uniforms to make that transition. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's had its rough spots. It's had its rough spots. We've had issues where it has been difficult, particularly with the union. And I think the culmination of it was about 3 months ago. It's about that, 3 or 4 months ago. Well, about a year ago, we brought in some outside crime scene experts to audit through, and the audit report that they had was, it pointed out some serious issues. We have known there have been some serious issues in there. And then I've been discussing with Texas Forensic Science Commission about how best do we provide a disclosure to TFSC. And you got to keep in mind, though, crime scene, latent prints, and digital, the multimedia evidence, sit outside of scope for TFSC. The state regulation that creates TFSC, those disciplines really aren't part of what TFSC has to be looking at. They don't have to be accredited. Crime scene is the last unit that we have that we need to get accredited. We've gotten latent prints accredited. We've gotten the digital multimedia unit accredited. So it was a difficult road to even find how best do we disclose this to TFSC.
Right.
And so that was what we, after the state AG had rendered an opinion off some questions from TFSC about what laboratories have to disclose, that decision created a good framework for us to easily be able to disclose and know what we needed to disclose to TFSC. So that's what started the round in the press of the 65 errors in there. I mean, they're errors that we've known have been there. So that's now precipitated moving on to starting the Crime Scene Academy. The shortest way for us to finish out the transition of crime scene was we brought in a whole new class of people. We'll run them through as about a 400 plus hour set of coursework. Then that'll be followed by observed casework, observed testimony before we actually sign them off to do stuff independently. And that coursework includes stuff that we've got people from Public Defender's Office and the DAs and HPD and the medical examiner and, like I say, ETL drawer researchers that are doing research in this area.
Are these, is this a design of you, the fact that you are here and that you're bringing these new standards into play here in Houston, Texas, or is it something that that's been duplicated throughout the country?
You know, I think there is a pretty universal drive, and there's places that are in various stages of it, of moving crime scene investigation to civilian. Traditionally, it has been something that has been uniform law enforcement that do crime scene investigation. You see a lot of cities, like Austin is entirely civilian. Actually, Washington, D.C. is in this same transition. They're probably a little bit behind where we're at. They still have more classified officers in there than we do. So you see this transition in a lot of cities to civilians. So that part, I think, is we're following along a national trend on that. What we've done in terms of this Crime Scene Academy, this is something that we've put together of using from folks that we brought in, new folks that we've hired for crime scene, the management of it, experience that they have in training crime scene investigators, and we've taken their experience and training programs that they've worked with, put that together, and then added to it with an eye towards the current understanding or the current expectation around things like cognitive bias and how do we control for that. The objective is, how do we get this to perform in an objective, systematic fashion from the crime scene through the reporting, and systematically be able to provide the information in a usable format to as many people as we can.
Yeah, we've reached, I just want to tell everybody we've reached the halfway point.
Yeah.
So if you have any questions, we've hit about 8:30 here. Call in. 713-807-1794 is the number. Peter Stout is our guest, CEO and president. He's got dual titles, ladies and gentlemen, of the...
It's always good to have more titles.
Exactly. You can never have too many. Houston Forensic Science Center. So still have Twitter up at HCCLA_TV. So send us your questions and call in. You were going to say about your titles?
I'd say, I joke, did myself a disservice when I got out of the Navy because I lost an awful lot of letters.
Well, you can keep them. You can still keep them.
I kept the haircut.
Right? Here, there's always going to be an inherent distrust of the government.
Yep.
And so what do you feel like you can do to help diminish those concerns by people? Because you are a government agency. I mean,
we're a form of government agency. We're of government agencies that I've worked. I mean, I've worked for the federal government. I mean, this is a funny hybrid. It's a little farther from government than most of the governments I've either worked with or worked for. But no, you're right. It still is a form of a government agency.
And I think there's this perception that, of course, politically, there's pressure within the government to make sure we get convictions. There's the private prison industry. There is, you know, the tough on crime crowd that if we have people coming into court and saying, well, these results aren't exactly accurate, or this got screwed up here, or this got screwed up there, we got people walking on technicalities, then you start to maybe get political pressure from other people. But at the same time, the general public, you know, if they don't see at least some balance in the system or some fairness in the system where people are getting those kind of results because investigators are willing to step up and say this wasn't done correctly. I mean, without that, it's almost a recipe for this. What we have is a distrust of government.
Oh, no doubt.
Within the criminal justice system.
And I think I keep trying to find a way to explain it to policymakers and decision makers, and I've worked at this now for close to 20 years of trying to figure out how to explain this. My view on it is the functioning of the justice system is a fundamental underpinning to our way of life. The rule of law is part of what makes America work. It's part of what makes companies willing to invest here. It's part of what makes the economy run. Underpinning that, and I think all of the NCIS shows, and this goes back, really hundreds of years, it goes back to the start of the country, of people's desire to see the scientific evidence. I point out in a lot of places when I talk about this, do you know who George Wythe is?
No.
So George Wythe was the country's first professor of law.
Somebody I probably should know.
You probably should know.
Given the fact that I possess a law degree.
Like
kind of help.
And you're
So the science nerd is educating the lawyer.
right. Clearly I'm
I
not a
will
lawyer.
nerd out with you any day, by the way. This is awesome, okay?
But George Wythe was, he was a signatory on the Declaration of Independence. He was so key he taught Thomas Jefferson. They saved him a place, because he was one of the last signatories on the Declaration of Independence. They saved him a place to sign. George Wythe lived to be 81 years old and was murdered. He was poisoned. And at the time of the trial on this, it was billed as the trial of the century, and it was a battle of experts, and it was a battle over the fact that the scientific test for arsenic that was newly out there wasn't performed appropriately. The medical examiner's report, it was a coroner report at that point, but didn't do the autopsy properly. It was the same thing you hear today.
Yeah.
At the start of the country.
Not much has changed.
So I contend, our fascination with these things is because people intuitively understand that there has to be, they have to have that kernel of some kind of objective truth that underlies this justice system for them to believe that it's going to treat them fairly. And yeah, it really rankles me that we have jeopardized this remarkable system that's been laid out simply because we have allowed the corruption of the forensic evidence. You think the Annie Dukins that are out there, you heard of Annie Dukin?
I mean, I'm
Go
going to have
for
to
it.
say no again.
Okay, so
I mean,
Andy Dugan.
you're asking me about people, and I'm just like, I'm
Well,
stuck at hello. This
Andy
is
Dugan-
embarrassing.
yeah, but Annie Dugan, I love that. She's been referred to as the Fukushima of forensics. She was a drug chemist in a municipal laboratory in Massachusetts. One laboratory.
Oh yeah, everybody's case got dismissed. Like 300,000 of them or something.
Oh, come on. Now all of a sudden you know.
Yes, no, I know that.
Once I start telling you,
I'm the one host that's stumped here.
She falsified, plain up, made up 60,000 results, compromised 24,000 cases. State of Massachusetts spent.
I'm familiar with the case. I didn't know the name.
Yeah.
$10+ million. She served 3 years, 5 years, something like that, and they just vacated all 24,000 cases because they never fixed it. That kind of stuff is horribly corrosive to the trust in the entire justice system.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, this is a country founded on distrust of government. And the problem is, to me, the shows you're talking about, NCIS, Law and Order, to me, they really do a disservice because I feel like jurors come in and they're like, well, if that person who's an expert in forensic science says it's so, it must be so. And you know, I just feel like that has been the biggest disservice in our criminal justice system is that jurors come in already preconditioned, thinking that it's infallible.
Yeah,
That the science is infallible.
And science, by definition, a scientific measurement has an error rate. It has a variance to it. You try and make it as small as you can, but there has to be an error rate to it. Now, your question in there someplace was, what are we doing to try and change the arc on this? I think this is in part because I've got a board that's very supportive of this. In fact, they're demanding of it. Good thing. Some of it is the transparency of the information. And it's not just throwing it all up there, but it's trying to make it there in an organized, searchable fashion that you can actually use. Put it there, but you've got to believe that we're going to put everything up there. That's going to take time. It takes things like this, of me coming, being willing to talk to anybody and everybody about what we're doing. One of the things I'm the most proud about, one of the things I really wish people would pay more attention to, I am a gigantic proponent of blind testing. So we've got a version of what I call blind controls that run in toxicology, latent prints, biology, controlled substances, and firearms. The goal is to get it across everything. But we manufacture case materials. So toxicology is the most mature on this. So we have, it's actually an outside company that manufactures samples for us that then we mock up to look like cases. They're submitted in through HPD's property room, so they come to our system as though they're cases. They go through the system without the analyst knowing whether they've got hold of a case material or one of these mock cases. We know they're manufactured at different concentrations of drugs and alcohol, and they run through the system, and we can track that and now look at that. My goal is to have that run through the system at my number that I've picked. And I work with a number of statisticians to try and refine this. I've got a couple of proposals out on research to try and help refine this further. But to run these at a 5% rate so that there's enough of a chance at any point in time that an analyst knows they are going to be confronted with one of these. We've run about, in the last year and a half, we've run about 300 of these through the system. So they expect to see them there. We know how they should be performing. But it also gives us a handle on being able to evaluate the system. So like in toxicology, with what we've run through there, I can stay with statistical assurance. So at a 95% confidence level, I can say that there is no statistical difference between analysts. I can say there is no statistical difference between days. I can say there is no statistical difference between instruments, between pipetters. I can look at the variance of these known materials moving through the system and know that the percent variance of those results is, for most of the concentrations, less than 1%. So that's across analyst, across day, across calibration, across batch. Those are the kinds of power that allow us to evaluate the entire system, but also to help control for. I've scratched my head for years of how do you head off an Andy Dugan, somebody that is willfully after suborning the system. Somehow you have to put a control into the system that sooner, I mean, if she's systematically
One person.
Yeah.
doing that kind of thing, sooner or later you're going to see it in a blind.
How do you, when you see an anomaly or when you see something that's outside of your acceptable variance, what are the steps that you've implemented to correct or to address those things?
So there are management structures as well as policies. The blinds are, I think, a big part of it. But you think even from the structure of it, we set up to have our quality division reports to me directly, just as the operational production side reports to me. So quality doesn't report to the operational side. Quality has the authority to shut something down. Quality, just like we talk about the laboratory having separation of potential influence, trying to set up the management structure even within the laboratory that different functions have the latitude to counterbalance each other. Now, you talk about scale of laboratories. We're about 200 employees. If you look at the most recent Bureau of Justice Statistics survey of publicly funded crime laboratories, there's about 411 laboratories that are surveyed in the U.S. So those are the easily identifiable crime labs. Of those 411, more than half of them have fewer than 24 employees.
Wow.
There's only 12 that have more than 100 employees. And I'm reasonably confident, I don't know for sure, but I'm reasonably confident that at 200 employees, we are probably one of the 5 largest laboratories in the country. So you talk about scale, it gives us a huge advantage in having that scale. I can have a dedicated quality division. I've got 7 people in there now. I'd like to have more in there. Most laboratories don't have that capability.
Yeah. Well, going back to the Massachusetts case, I mean, did you talk about somebody going in there and willfully manipulating this evidence, destroying evidence, tampering with it, whatever? Did it ever come out, because I knew generally about the story, I mean, I didn't know her name, and I don't know too many of them, but did it ever come out what her motivation for doing this was?
God, I'm kidding. That was a joke.
I don't think it's ever been really clear. Now, the things that I see over that make me go, eh.
Because, I mean, somebody's in there taking a bribe.
Well, it doesn't seem like there was anything about bribery. Now, this was over the course of 9 years that she did this. So right there suggests to me that there's a management issue. I mean, how did management not understand that? Now, the other one is she was 10 times as productive as anybody else. And that, I understand it. That was kind of where it started to unravel, was people going, wait a sec, she's so much more productive than everybody else. What's going on?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I was talking to somebody I knew years ago about the financial industry in the UK. And over in the UK, particularly if you work in a lot of European countries, you have to take 30 days off straight. That you are required to take basically a month-long vacation in a row.
Because you
they call it holiday,
back,
you know? No, because because one of the things is particularly in the financial industry, is that if you are committing a fraud against your company, and you're gone for 30 days,
it's going to show up.
It's going to show up, and it's going to unravel.
Oh, I see.
And so I'm wondering if there is something like that that you could build into a system like you have to, you know, that if somebody is doing something, if somebody is taking bribes or manipulating evidence, that, you know, by sending them on a holiday, if you will, it can kind of come out.
Well, it's how do you construct a system of checks and balances within the system? Trying to set up the system so you're not placing, you know, imperfect people in a tempting circumstance. How do you set up the system so that you can try and detect issues like that?
I guess that's why they hired you, right?
Oh, I'm hoping. Now, one of the things that we are looking to implement here, so we have blind materials that go through. We've got a system that we've added onto that of blinded re-verifications of work. So basically, you can think of them as postmortems or blinded random sampling of cases on the backside to re-audit and look at those cases. Like in firearms, and actually firearms is kind of cool, of what we've been trying in firearms is the pattern recognition disciplines, there's been a lot of criticism of fingerprints in firearms and some of those. So one, we've got the start of a black box study in firearms that we're working with NIST on. We've got blinded materials that we put through, but we try to construct those so they actually are the challenge samples. Try to construct them to actually be right on that line of where somebody might call it one way or the other, and deliberately go at that line. So making it of, you take a couple of different types of ammunition in 2 different guns that are the same make and model, and put that together also with fired materials that came from neither gun, and now present that blinded to somebody. And we've been mixing up, giving that to an experienced examiner first and then a less experienced examiner second, and the other way around, and see where issues start to arise or where disagreements start to arise.
What are your education requirements, and how do you check those? Because remember, we had
yeah, I'm about to go online. I'm gonna get my fingerprint specialist online.
Well, I mean, like, remember who, Dr. Gual or whatever, that had the educational problem where she lied on her resume and everything? I mean, that is a huge problem if somebody comes in misrepresenting their qualifications to y'all.
So, I mean, we do background checks, we do degree verifications. I mean, we do what's available to try and check those and prevent those. I think some component of it is, I spend a lot of time talking with staff. The management team, I encourage the management team to spend a lot of time talking with staff. It's a little bit like airport security. There's the gizmos, but really most of the airport security is watching the people. Getting to know them well enough to see what's an unusual behavior. So, I mean, there's an active management component to it as well. But it's, again, it's got to be a multi-layer approach.
I agree.
You can't just be one tool. It's got to be multiple tools. Not every tool is going to catch every issue. One I'm looking to get in place is, because you kind of look at it of, while we go and observe testimony, it's part of our accreditation requirements that we have somebody that goes and observes testimony. So adding on to that of, you can think of it of kind of blind evaluation of even testimony. Ideas will get transcripts, and there are some models of transcript reviews post, but taking the transcript review and now trying to go at it with a team of people to try and have different views of that transcript. So get somebody on a committee to review those that is effectively a layperson. So somebody that's out of my finance department or something like that isn't really a scientist. Somebody that's obviously an expert in that particular discipline to look for, is this structurally correct, scientifically correct? But I think it's also good to see, maybe we can get a lawyer involved. Look at these things, because you're going to see some things in court watching the person. You're going to see some things in a transcript that you aren't necessarily going to see.
Speaking of in-court watching, for ballistics, for example, you said, well, we're going to try to do study, test 1. I'm sorry, I'm not a scientist. Test 1, test 2, and then test 3, and the analyst won't know which is the actual and which is the blind. Or if an individual, or if there's another analysis of blood where test 1's within range, test 2 is not in range, or test 3 is the one that you need. Are those individuals, in testimony, I'm not seeing the firearms expert or the toxicology expert testifying to, well, first I had this, test 1, and then I had test 2, but it was really test 3 that turns out to be the actual blood or the bullet or the ballistics exam. How can the defense, because it seems like great cross-examination, it seems like great inquiries onto examination, are those blinds and controls available to defense upon request through a discovery order? Or are those things that your office provides, or are they not? In other words, if there's a gun involved and there's ballistics involved, and you actually ran, or the office ran a blind, another blind, or another other sample, and then my guy's ballistics or blood was mixed in there, I'd like to know all the tests that the analysts ran through, and are those available too? Are you making those available?
What we've been trying to do, and like I said, we've been working on blinds that we've been starting to introduce and get used to this, and as near as I can tell, there are a few models of blinds around. I know Washington, D.C. is thinking about building in some blinds. The HCCLA, U.S. Army Crime Investigative Laboratory, has done a handful, 3 or 4 blinds that they've put through their system. The Toronto laboratory, they do 2 or 3 blinds a year. We've done like 300.
Right.
So now that we've come to understand how can we reliably get these in there, how do we get hold of firearm materials that we can actually use sustainably, how do we get hold of drug materials that we can use sustainably, there's been a lot of mechanics that we've had to work at, and we still have stuff we've got to work on. I mean, we haven't got this all perfected yet. But if you go to our external website, HoustonForensicScience.org, and you go under the About Us, and it's in red under that menu of e-discovery and public documents. The goal has been to try and get anything that's not in the specific case, the data or whatever that's specific to that case, or has personally identifiable information for that case. What I'd love to do is have that go with the report when the report goes out.
Right.
And we've got to get information systems fixed to do that. But if it's not that, and if it's everything else that's in between, the goal is to try and have that organized on the website so you can get at it.
Interesting.
So calibrations and temperature logs and blind control reports and method validations and SOPs and all of those types of things on the website so you can get at it. Now the next goal of that is, so you've got one aspect of that you can go mine that and look for anything that may be ancillarily reported. The other aspect is, hopefully with the new limbs and some additional development there, I can't do it just yet, is you go type in your case number and those documents that are relevant to it are returned to you.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
As a group.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
But the idea is trying to get all that stuff there so you can go find it. I mean, the goal is, and we've got about 5,000 documents up there right now. I'm thinking when we're really at scale, it'll be probably more like 20 or 30,000 documents. But putting all that stuff there
That's
so you
awesome.
can go find it.
We got somebody on the phone who wants to talk to you.
All right.
Let's bring him on. Hello. Thanks for calling
Hi,
Reasonable
I'd like
Doubt.
Yeah, hi. I'd like to ask your guest what tests they want the FBI to do that they can't handle because they're too sophisticated, perhaps.
Oh, well, that would be something that I also wanted to, I think goes along the line of what are the limitations of your lab? And, what are some things that, if you had the magic wand that, I would lift this limitation to have?
Well, all labs struggle with capacity issues. And what you see that heads to FBI is often trying to address capacity issues. We don't do mitochondrial DNA. That UNT up in University of North Texas, this is basically the main mitochondrial DNA laboratory in the state, and FBI does mitochondrial DNA.
What is mitochondrial DNA?
I have no idea what that means, but that sounds...
The mother's contribution to the DNA.
Yeah, he's right. It's basically, so it's from the mitochondria within the cell. And yeah, Ramit's standing back there because when I used a word that has more than 5 syllables in it, she starts getting exercise.
I know, right?
But it basically is, it's a
words
contribution to the DNA from the mother's side. It's matrilineal, just like we call them YSTRs, but DNA that's off the Y chromosome is the patrilineal side. So they only contributed by the father.
Right.
We don't do trace evidence. And quite frankly, I don't really care to get into hair fiber analysis. I don't think it's particularly valid. Trace has its place, but it's got a lot of challenges to it. I think we need to focus on some of the other areas, so we don't do trace. We do latent prints. We do forensic biology work, DNA. We do toxicology. We don't do postmortem toxicology. That's with the medical examiner.
Ask him why not.
Why don't we do postmortem toxicology?
Why don't you believe in hair fiber analysis?
The hair fiber matching?
It's like the voice of God coming in.
Yeah, the voice of God shows up there. Hair fiber matching. I'm sure there are hair fiber microscopists that would argue with me, but I mean, the FBI themselves admitted for the last decades, the testimony has been grossly overstated.
And bite mark evidence.
And bite mark evidence.
Oh.
So,
Snaggletooth.
Yeah.
so I am not a hair microscopist. I'm a toxicologist by training. But all of my research over the years has been, ironically, and it's always good for a giggle someplace, how drugs get into hair. I get it.
Did you get it?
So I've looked at a lot of hair. And frankly, I don't see it. I just don't.
Is that something that, okay, you come into Houston, there's no secret that, you know, the crime lab in Houston has had problems. And so, you know, what was your thought process of coming, I mean, had you ever been to Houston before,
Nope.
in Texas? I mean,
Nope.
you probably knew that you were coming into some real changes that were going on. And
The proverbial it storm.
yeah, the proverbial it storm.
I tell people,
talk to me about
when I talk about Houston with groups, and actually I was just at National Institute of Standards talking about this. I often start the presentation with, this is what Houston was. 2003, New York Times headline, the worst crime laboratory in the country. That's part of what this is. It's also part of what the strength of this is, because we know what bad looks like.
And it can only get better, right? Can it actually get worse than it was in 2000?
You'd like to think. You'd like to think. But, you know, there is actually a real advantage in that. We can do things here because of what Houston was. A lot of my crime laboratory colleagues are very hesitant about getting blind quality control in.
Sure.
You know, they worry about, are my analysts going to accept it? I can't afford to do it. I can take the chance on doing it. It's an important thing. I think it is tremendously valuable. It's a hugely powerful control. I can take the chance to do that. I can take the chance to try and craft this bulwark of a case management unit to help try and filter information. I can say, you know, we need a new information management system. We've got to do this. I can take the chance, and I've got a board that's supportive of saying, you know, if we've got a quality incident, we're going to put it up on the website. We're going to make it available. That's not a common thing in laboratories to say,
right,
here's all the errors.
Most of the time you get the, huh?
Right.
What?
But because of what Houston was, we could do that. Yeah, I was in a very comfortable research position. The group was very successful. We did really well on grant work. I'm doing quite well. No, I came because of what Houston is.
We have to wrap it up, man. We are out of time.
I'm totally telling my guy next time,
Yeah.
no, they're gonna catch you, man. They got
Times are changing around.
Well, you know, I say we've gotten an awful lot. We've come a long way. I'm really pleased with the progress we've made. We haven't solved everything yet. We still have work to do.
Well, you know what? We appreciate you coming on the program tonight and talking about it.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Peter Stout, thanks for joining us. Julio, thank you for joining us again.
Oh man,
We're always looking forward to having you on every week.
you know, I just come here, make some jokes, you know.
I'm gonna get ready, buckle down for that hurricane, man. All right. That's all the time we have for this week, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to try and get Anthony Graves on the program hopefully next week, and we will join you next week for another great episode of Reasonable Doubt. Be sure to check us out on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. Get all the updates on the latest episodes. Good night, everybody.